All right, who do I pass it to?
I think I'm next.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is do a little slide presentation, and Linda Brown and I will do it together. And then at the end of it, we're going to share some of the things that are most interesting, the policy issues, things in the town. And we're going to ask various people to speak to those. And at the very end, we'll take questions. So that's the game plan. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Is that on slideshow, Jan? I think it's on slideshow. I'm trying to make it on slideshow. Does that work?
Mm-hmm. That's fine. There's also a little presentation icon at the bottom, Julie, if to make it full screen.
All right. All right.
There you go. Down.
Is that one?
It's kind of in the middle. It looks like a projector screen there.
Let's see that one.
Yeah, that one.
Thank you.
There you go.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you. All right. So what is CHALT? And we're a group of citizens that we advocate for engaged and responsive leadership to manage our town's growth. The town council actually spends 90% of its time reviewing projects, and that has a lot to do with how our town grows and how we address climate change. One of the things we do is we collaborate with other community groups, and we assist our elected leaders to put our town on the cutting edge of environmental stewardship. We also often help neighborhoods and with specific problems who really don't know how to effectively advocate with the town. We keep up to date on town matters. For example, today there was a notice from the project director of the town who was making an announcement about Estes Drive and how it's going to be closed for the next year and a half, or this is going to have limited access. And the message he sent was completely out of date, and the phone number was not working. And so I picked up the phone and called, and I'm hoping we'll get some adjustment to that. But I think to have an organization that's a bit of a squeaky wheel and encourages people to come out and engage with their government is really what we're all about. We believe in protecting the natural environment. We've been very active in those areas, and we're going to hear more about it. So next. So how did CHALT get started? In 2014 or 2013, there were a couple town processes that went on that turned out to be quite frustrating. One was the 2020 comprehensive plan, and it's really important to have a comprehensive plan and know what the town is planning to do. And the town did a great job at reaching out to groups, and there were I would say hundreds of people that attended various meetings. But at the end of it all, the plan was very loose and not specific. And all the action items that we had written for it kind of disappeared and didn't see the light of day. This was followed by a focus group process for the Central West area, which is up near the Aura and that controversial project that just passed. And that process went on for a year and a half and kind of ended in something that was somewhat of a compromise. So I would say that one was halfway successful. The last process that was really concerning was the redevelopment of the Ephesus Fordham area, which is a very large area that was later renamed Blue Hill, paid for by a consultant hired by the town. And this area of town became kind of automatic zoning, in that public hearings disappeared. It didn't have any stormwater provisions, and it didn't have any requirements for affordable housing. So we lost a significant number of affordable housing units when that Blue Hill was approved. So a group started meeting together and we said, well, what are we for? What are we in favor of? And we came up with a list of things, and you can read those there. And then after that, we decided to go out and encourage people to run for office. So what is smart growth? Oops. So our definition for smart growth is growth that is resilient in the face of climate change. It provides infrastructure. And when we say infrastructure, that's what we're trying to do nationally. That's what Biden's trying to get through. But we're talking about transit. We're talking about parks. We're talking about libraries. We need the infrastructure. You can't just grow and not have those things. Otherwise, things become so congested that people don't find their community livable anymore. One of the smartest things that the town council ever did was to pass the comprehensive land use plan back in the mid-80s. And what it did was said, we're not going to sprawl forever. We're going to set the urban services area, and this is the area that we will grow to. And beyond that, we'll call something called the rural buffer. And beyond that is the county. And basically, because the water and sewer provision of those services were limited to those lines, that is in fact what's happened to our town. We have grown in a very orderly way. Also, smart growth is providing a mix of diverse housing. It's community spaces, retail, and transit options. And the last item is to grow sustainably economically. And that's a hard concept, but a lot of folks think that by building a lot of apartments or any kind of growth, that's helping things in some way. And from a revenue point of view. And in fact, it does increase the tax base. There's no question about that. The tax base goes up and there's more money coming into the town. However, we have good evidence that in fact, over the years, for the last 7 years at least, despite all the growth, in fact, there's far more money going out than coming in. And as a result of that, taxes have increased. So it's well documented that residential growth does not pay for itself. So on to the next. So lots of people are confused about a political action committee and what it is. And we're often called a PAC, which we're not. We have a PAC, but we are not a PAC. The CHALT political action leadership is really separate from CHALT and exists in order to meet North Carolina campaign finance laws. When CHALT began back in 2014, after we had decided that we wanted to endorse candidates, we realized that we wanted to at least get the word out, and we wanted to buy brochures and make cards, palm cards or whatever at the polls. And so when we realized we were going to be spending money, we found out that, hey, if you do that, you really need to have a political action committee because the state requires it if you're spending money for elected leaders that you want to elect. So that's what we did. And the main point of all this is we make sources of all our money receive public, and that's a good law. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Linda. Linda, you're on mute.
Thank you, Julie. So what does CHALT do? Probably the most important thing is to provide information to the public. We let people know what's going on, especially things that affect the livability of Chapel Hill and affect their own neighborhoods. We advocate for town policies that benefit communities and neighborhoods. We develop and hold educational forums. We develop positions and policies based on data, And we actively engage elected officials and residents in discussions of town issues and provide well-researched database advice and counsel. And as you know, we make endorsements for candidates. An example of one of our programs was last May 2020, at the beginning of the, I guess you would call it the climb of the curve of the coronavirus. We held a program, a Zoom program, with a Dr. David Ingram, who was a disease specialist. And we made that available to the public. We provided an opportunity for people to ask questions. And we have, Julie, you were going to show us some of the slides of some of the activities that CHALT
I have that all teed up, but I'm afraid that if I show it, that I'll lose what I have on the screen now. So I could try it. You want me to try it? We'll see.
Well, I can think of a couple. We did 2 programs on climate change. So those I'm well aware of. And just last Sunday, we did the program that provided a tour of the Turkish Cultural Center. So those were a couple of recent ones. Okay.
We did one on tiny homes as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. CHALT achievements. In 2021, the town finally produced a town-wide traffic model that was first proposed by CHALT members in 2014. In 2019, we led the effort to motivate the town to help the displaced Park Apartment residents by giving them some financial support to help with their moving costs. In 2016, CHALT advocated and achieved a light industrial zone on Eubanks Road, realizing, of course, that residential development wasn't paying for itself and that an industrial zone would bring in more revenue than it would actually cost the town. In 2016, CHALT petitioned the council to investigate the use of electric buses. And the first 3 electric buses were delivered in 2021. And we are going to have more electric buses as they become available. In 2015, CHALT advocated for the successful purchase of the Legion Road property for a town park. It is the only green space that remains in Blue Hill. Okay. What are our goals? First of all, we want to regain local control. There is a lot of money coming into Chapel Hill from outside sources that seems to be directing what is happening in our town. Secondly, we want to build a green infrastructure. We all know that stormwater, for example, is a major problem. Third, we have always advocated for housing for everyone. And that housing should be diverse. It should be a mix of housing, mixed income housing, and it should be dispersed all through Chapel Hill. Fourth, public engagement. Again, we want to have more members of the community engaged in what's happening to our town. We want to have more voices heard. And 5, we want to grow a strong economy that will make Chapel Hill economically sustainable.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to just hear from folks who have worked with CHALT, who have some expertise, and we'll see what some of the issues that have been particularly interesting, important to us. So I'm going to call on Fred Lampa, who is going to talk a little bit about transit planning, and he is he is someone who attends a lot of transit meetings. Fred?
One of the things I wanted to touch on is the joint NC Department of Transportation and the Orange Durham MPO consultant study associated with the project called Reimagining 15501, which is the major north-south corridor that impacts on Chapel Hill. This was done in 2018. It was done as a consultant study with initially 0 citizen input. And it quickly became apparent that this was a really bizarre output. There was no local traffic studies included in this, only state and regional traffic studies. None of the dozens of Chapel Hill traffic studies were included. None of the major new developments along this corridor, such as the Wegmans, such as the UNC healthcare up there near 15501 and Interstate 40. It was a bizarre situation. This consultant team presented 3 scenarios and invited citizens to choose between them. All 3 of these scenarios assumed that the Durham Orange Light Rail project would be in place. And there was no alternatives, assuming that the light rail project might not happen. And citizens were requested to say, oh, I like A or B or C. And in fact, A, B, and C all were a dramatic failure. For example, all 3 of these scenarios assumed that the Chapel Hill section would have 3 new super streets. I don't know if you all know what a super street is, but I'll leave that to you look up. There is already one super street that we all have come to hate, because all it does is take a dramatic amount of additional time to get from point A to point B, such as crossing 15501, the major north-south corridor in the town. And
Thank you, Fred.
so, yeah, okay, that pretty much sums up the kind of thing that we've looked at.
Do you want to say anything about Chapel Hill Transit in passing?
Well, it took Chapel Hill Transit 5 years now to get their first electric bus that we initially petitioned the town council to investigate back in March of 2016. So things do not move necessarily very rapidly.
Well, we thank you for that work, because it was, I think your agitation constant really did pay off in the end. So now we're going to hear a little bit about local traffic and kind of how CHALT has been involved in helping different areas. So Chuck Berlin.
I moved to Chapel Hill 5 years ago, and shortly after I arrived, knowing very little about the town, I decided just to, out of interest, attend a city council meeting to see what it was like. And it turned out that that was the very meeting where Wegmans received its final approval there, which was just a stone's throw from where I lived. So I was quite interested to hear the presentations. And when they got to the traffic presentation, I was rather stunned to learn that the plan for traffic was that all traffic coming in and out of Wegmans was to be routed onto Old Durham Road, which is the door to many of our neighborhoods here, which just seemed like an untenable situation to me. And I was inspired, even though I knew nothing about the town at that point, to get up and give my 3 minutes of citizens testimony at that meeting, after which one of my neighbors came over and said, you should get involved in this, and subsequently introduced me to Julie, which turned out to be very fortuitous, because in the next 3 years, CHALT was an invaluable resource to me in understanding how to address this kind of issue, who the decision makers were, how to make sure my neighbors were as much as possible in the loop about this, how to get public meetings organized, and also how to acquire the technical knowledge that I need. And a special shout out to Fred Lampe for that. In due course, in digging through the 400 pages of the town's traffic consultant's report, I discovered that he was predicting an additional 1 million to 1.5 million cars per year on Old Durham Road, a 2-lane road. I mean, can you imagine that? That's a mind-boggling number. And at one meeting, when I quoted that number to the then head of the town planning department, even he was taken aback by that, hadn't realized that. So what ensued were 3 years of emails and public meetings where very few people attended in first, and those numbers grew over time, and meeting with town officials, as well as the builder and Wegmans representative, and saying, you know, not only is this a serious problem, but there may be solutions to be considered here. And indeed, over that period of time, 3 changes were made to the traffic plan. The first 2 were small modifications of the then existing intersection in front of the State Employees Credit Union building, the big glass building on 15501 next to Wegmans there, which didn't really solve the problem. But the biggest mitigation, which really made a difference, was about a year before Wegmans opened. Wegmans announced that they and SECU had reached an agreement to rebuild that intersection so there would be a direct connection between 15501 and Wegmans there, which would take a fair amount of traffic off of Old Durham Road. And indeed, since Wegmans has opened, that has been the case. It hasn't been the horrific disaster that we anticipated. It's been manageable. I mean, clearly there's more traffic, but it hasn't overwhelmed us at this point. And I really have the very generous and thoughtful guidance and encouragement that I got from CHALT to put out the efforts that I did. You know, did my efforts influence that final decision? I don't know, but I suspect it had some influence on it there. So that's my story.
Thanks so much, Chuck. And another big issue is stormwater, and something that I personally have been very much involved in for several years. But we have Pamela Schultz with us tonight, and she's former chair of the Stormwater Advisory Board and now involved in a new effort with stormwater. Pamela?
Thanks, Julie. Good evening, everyone. I first got to know Julie through the Stormwater Management Utility Advisory Board. It's a long name. And one of the first projects that we really worked on together was related to the redevelopment of the Chapel Hill High School. And I was advocating for changes in the design of the high school. I guess I first was initially concerned because of the old high school had been built on a stream. There were flooding issues, and it seemed like the new building was similarly had some of the same potentials. Anyway, this was the first year that I was on the Stormwater Board. I was very new to town policies and politics. The things I was advocating for were related to less pavement and more green infrastructure. There's specifically a connector road that they wanted to build. And I had an idea that I felt that road really would be better served to be some type of a trail connecting the schools, and the traffic could be handled in a different way. Particularly because there was also a traffic study. There's often this relationship between traffic and stormwater. There was a traffic study that had predicted that the traffic was going to be ridiculous at 3 different intersections once the school was built. We were successful in getting a bioretention basin, although the connector road that I was hoping would be a green space was built. And I've heard from many of my neighbors that the traffic around the high school is very difficult. But having, being able to get some guidance on how to advocate for this was very important for me. And it meant a lot to have that support. as I was thinking about what to say tonight, that phrase of less pavement, more green infrastructure also seems to sum up exactly what CHALT advocates when considering new development. CHALT was a strong supporter of a modification to the project review process recently in Chapel Hill based on a petition from the Stormwater Advisory Board that I worked on. We will now have larger projects greater than 5 acres and with stream corridors present get reviewed by the Stormwater Board and staff, or with support from the staff at an early design phase. So I'm really hopeful that this change will help improve the stormwater management by adding more green infrastructure. I guess I'll just sum up what, just saying that not all the suggested changes that get incorporated into projects get made, but I think the CHALT has consistently been a strong voice for good stormwater management.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn to Blue Hill. Tom Henkel, you want to talk a little bit about form-based code and all that?
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Yeah, in February of 2014, the town announced that we could all see a draft version of the so-called form-based code. So they held a public event at the library. And so a fair share of us went to hear the presentation about how great the form-based code was going to be for that district. And one of the promises was that the code was going to require that work would be done to reduce the flooding in that area. That's been a major problem for years. So at a break, I went over to the stormwater management expert who was at one of the tables, and I said, I hear that you're going to improve the flooding. He said, no, that's not quite right. Our mandate is to make sure that after development, flooding is no worse than it was before development. Well, you know, that's not quite what the PR was saying. So afterwards, a group of us decided to go through that draft version of the form-based code with a fine-tooth comb and see if there were ways to improve it. So we came up with a matrix of almost 45 changes in language, which we identified the current language, which we didn't agree with. We suggested new language, and we gave the reasons for the new language. It was quite a document, which we submitted to the staff and to the mayor and council. Well, in the end, they adopted exactly 0 of our recommendations. So at that point, those of us that had been working on this decided that since the council was not going to pay attention to concerned citizens, maybe it was time to get a new council and mayor. So that was the beginning of CHALT. But we have advocated for sustainability in terms of energy, as well as stormwater management for years. And so that's what I want to say about form-based code. It is a document which takes decision matters out of the hands of our elected officials, and the decisions on development are in the hands of the town manager and the community design commission. And we've been trying to get Pam and the council for years to make some modifications, but they claim they can't. So that's why we feel it's now time for a change and try to get that form-based code either modified or rescinded.
Okay, thank you, Tom. The next subject is affordable housing. And Andrea, you had a little experience, maybe you wanted to recount, and then we'll turn to Linda.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm fairly new to being involved with CHALT. I met Julie and other folks in CHALT a few years ago, but it's really been over the last 6 months that I've been a little bit more involved. What originally brought me into contact with CHALT was I was really upset about the clear cutting of trees in Chapel Hill. I moved here about 10 years ago, and I'm actually from the southwest part of the United States. So coming here and seeing all the beautiful trees was just, something that was just so wonderful for me and part of the draw from coming here. So I was really devastated just seeing so many trees, being clear cut all the time over the last 10 years. And I didn't know what to do about it. I had never really been involved in town politics before. And so one day, just out of frustration, I just kind of fired off, an email to the town council. I don't even remember who it was. I didn't know who to contact. And they actually connected me with CHALT. They said, hey, it sounds like your values, kind of align with what CHALT is doing. And I am still just so grateful for that experience because in working with CHALT, they helped me. They were working on a petition also to revise the tree ordinance because of the same reason, because of the clear cutting. And so they helped me understand even how you go about creating a petition, because I had no idea what that was or how you would go about doing it. And they helped me go before the town council, which I had never done before. I never thought that I would go before the town council and make a proposal. So that really empowered me to know that I can, get involved and make a difference. So connecting that to the affordable housing, a few months ago, Julie, knowing that I was interested in these kinds of things, just about how town development works and clear cutting and that kind of thing. Tom, did you want to mute yourself?
I'm sorry, I thought I had.
That's okay. Yeah. So just knowing that I was involved in or interested in these kinds of things, Julie invited me along on, I guess you'd call it a consult with a housing association over on J Street that they have this beautiful forested area next to their I think it's a condominium complex, like their housing complex. And it was being proposed through the town council for that to be clear cut, to put affordable housing on it. And so I went along with Julie just to talk to the homeowner who was in leadership for the housing association, because they were really fighting this affordable housing development. And I'll just kind of sum up by saying that it was a real learning experience for me, because I came to understand just, the different the different priorities that sometimes are pitted against each other with really difficult decisions, because the people in this housing complex, they love their forest that's next to them, and I have a forest next to where I live too, and I love walking in it, and it's very nourishing for me. And they didn't want it to be cut down, but at the same time, we need to find sites to put affordable housing for people. So how do you make those decisions? And so CHALT, didn't take sides on it, but they were just providing resources and guidance on how they could go about navigating and gathering more information on the issue. So that was just really interesting and empowering for me.
Okay, Linda, you're up next.
Okay, I'll talk about how I got involved with CHALT and also affordable housing. I moved to Chapel Hill in June of 2018. And a month later, I found out that redevelopment of the property along Irwin Road behind my community was scheduled for the creation of a development that was to be 7 times the density of the surrounding neighborhood. Shortly after I raised an alarm on Nextdoor, I was contacted by Julie asking how CHALT might help. And she invited me to a meeting to explain the problem. CHALT's members steered me through the functioning of advisory boards, the council, and the petitioning process. And with their help and opposition from the surrounding neighborhoods, the council unanimously turned the project down. And instead of 132 to 140 dwelling units in 3 buildings that were to be 4 stories tall, the new plan is for 58 for-sale townhomes, which will include 7 affordable units. In a perfect world, I wish that could have remained a forested area, but certainly the new plan is better. One of CHALT's very first public programs took place in October of 2017 at the town hall. That program was entitled A Place to Call Home, Housing Available for All Income Levels. It advocated for different types of housing for all income levels and ages. CHALT also supported the creation of the Master Leasing Program, which subsidizes rentals for people who would otherwise be completely homeless. In 2018, CHALT encouraged signatures on a petition for, as well as provided an informational program on tiny homes. In 2019, CHALT successfully advocated for the creation of workforce housing at UNC's new Easttown campus and advocated for financial assistance for the displaced residents of the Park Apartments, one of Chapel Hill's last affordable residential communities, which was located in Blue Hill. CHALT also requested that the town create a permanent solution for mobile park residents long before the council was given an ultimatum on the mobile home park at 1200 MLK. In addition, CHALT has repeatedly called upon the council not to replace affordable housing in areas prone to flooding and areas next to major highways with high concentration of air and noise pollution that place residents' health at risk. CHALT has repeatedly called upon the council to create affordable mixed income housing communities throughout Chapel Hill, along with gentle infill density instead of only creating economically segregated low-income housing. They have asked for a diverse mixture of housing types to be created and pointed out the need for affordable for-sale housing that will enable people to create equity, have something that they can leverage, and help close the wealth gap. The Rod Stevens report just came out a few weeks ago on Chapel Hill's housing, basically says the same thing CHALT has been saying all along. CHALT realizes that Orange County has the land and Chapel Hill has the money, and that the two must work together. 12,000 units of affordable housing are needed in Orange County. CHALT does not believe that the current policy of obtaining a few units of affordable housing from developers can ever meet the need for Chapel Hill or for Orange County, and that a fundamentally different approach will be required to do so.
Wow, Linda, thank you for putting that together. But hearing it all together is quite amazing. So we want to kind of wrap things up pretty soon, but I want to make sure that folks that are new to CHALT can ask questions. So why don't we see if there are any questions? And or if there's anything to add among the folks that are active with CHALT too. I'm sure there are many issues we haven't covered. So let's see, George Entman. George?
Yes, as I'm listening, I mean, as I've been writing on listservs and stuff like the one Tom is on, and probably somebody else, Diane. There's so many questions that are raised, and I'm wondering if there's any way, any place that people can have discussions about this. And I think of the old Orange, some of the old Orange County things that really got going, but there was information, and I always miss Nancy Oates, because she had that great blog that told us what was going on, and she was one of the few, as far as I know, the only council person who's ever really told us in a way that I could understand. I mean, I'm not going on the website and searching, through hours and hours of testimony. I can't do it. I mean, I admire the people who work, in the town council, but there's no way I'm going to even just attempt to watch all that, like you people who are tough. I am. So, but I wonder if there's some way to have a discussion where one can get some facts and stuff. It's a project I'm proposing for you.
Okay. Well, one of the things would be to join a regular CHALT call, and we actually do discuss things. And you could do that, George, if you wanted to take a little time.
How do you do it?
Just so if people want to get more involved, they should send an email to info@chalt.org and say, kind of indicate what your interest is. Would you like, a discussion on X topic? Or, and that's actually a good way to start, would be to come to a CHALT call and propose a study. That happens often.
It's a lot of work.
On a topic, whatever the topic is of your interest.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Bill?
I have a question, two
Bill.
questions. First, there was a mention about not raising sufficient tax funds from housing versus industrial. I'm not familiar with what the whole tax situation in Chapel Hill is. I think there's no income tax. So is everything based on property tax?
Yes, so partly that's true. I'm going to ask Fred to maybe comment on that a bit, but property tax is an important part of it, but income comes from other sources as well for tax revenue. Fred?
Property tax and our portion of the sales tax represent some 60–70% of the town budget. The remainder comes from various fees and activities. One of the things to keep in mind here, the Chapel Hill Transit represents about a quarter of the total expenditures of the town. Of that, the town itself spends on the order of a quarter of the total amount of the Chapel Hill Transit budget. So there's all kinds of items that bring revenue in, but the fundamental item that has the biggest swing is property tax.
And so industrial properties bring in more, they're valued higher and bring in more tax revenue. Is that the case?
That's entirely dependent upon the size of the project. What they do is they require far less town service in costs. So they're on the expenditure side of the bucket. That's where they, both commercial, office, retail, and industrial are positive. But unfortunately, Chapel Hill has very little of those and has been only growing with residential property.
Am I correct that the university does not pay property tax on its properties?
You are correct.
Okay. Is there any income to the city from the university or the state, any kind of state support for university activities?
There are small bits and pieces that the university funds. They do support the Chapel Hill Fire Department. They also support the Chapel Hill Transit Organization. Those are the primary significant components.
And I think we would need to add to that, Fred, the many jobs, employment opportunities at the university. Yeah. I mean, that's the reason that a lot of us came to this town. It's the university.
But
yes.
we only support the town in terms of basically our property tax and sales tax. The university brings in has a large salary force in the city that's very important. Second
so
question.
could I go on to someone else for a minute and maybe come back to you, Bill?
Okay, I have a second
So
question.
Nan Nixon's husband, yes, Hans.
Good. Andrea, you just got me on something like don't cut down the trees. And I've had heated discussions with CHALT members when I've been canvassing for the last local election. Because, and I had a nice discussion with Tom Henkel, but I disagree with him, and I disagree with him more now, that the housing that CHALT is always talking about is very low. They want 4 stories, maybe 5 stories, but always you go against tall houses. Well, in a growing area, that's not environmentally sound. And that's what I'm really a little upset about CHALT, because you talk about the environment, but then you say we have 4-story, maybe 5-story house. I'm looking at all these buildings that are going up and scattered over as a Blue Hill. I'm not even sure about the areas. And there should be tall houses instead of, if it want to be environmentally sound. I'm sorry that's an area that I think we should be discussed a little more.
Let me make this quick observation. If in fact building tall was the solution, Manhattan, New York City would be the cheapest place in the world to live.
It's not how you can, no, that's nonsense. I'm sorry, that's a funny comment, but nonsense, and you know it. You're too smart not to know that.
Okay, well, we can disagree respectfully here. I know Tom is quite knowledgeable in the area of buildings, and we've had many discussions about how you can get a zero carbon building, which we actually featured with the Turkish Cultural Center last Sunday with a special program. But if my understanding is that if you do, I heard the architect of that building talk about the 4 stories as being quite possible to be carbon neutral, and that when you go above it, you lose that. But I think Tom could probably back me up on that, but we probably don't need to get into that now. Other comments?
Let me just say very quickly, Julie.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's correct. That's why we've advocated for roughly 4-story structures. We use the roof for solar energy systems, and you can design a net zero carbon building when you're roughly 4 stories.
So any other questions from other folks? And if not, we can come back to Bill for one last one. Or any other comments?
Can you define livable? Like it seems different for every CHALT member.
That Sean?
Like what does livable mean to CHALT?
Have you, I don't know if you've taken a look at our website, but we have actually taken a lot of time to define that. And actually, I think I described it earlier, maybe you joined a little later. But I think having parks, libraries, transit, a quality of life, recreation, a mix of housing, all the things that Linda went over in her slide.
I mean, I read it, but there's no metrics. Like, how do you measure success or winning, or like it's something as an engineer, like how do you measure livability to you? I've read your website. I've been in the meeting the whole time. It's still not clear to me, like, what does livable mean to CHALT? Because it's not something that's like.
Okay, let's see if anyone else wants to address that.
There have been a lot of discussions about what is the ideal size of a town or a city. And I think perhaps livable might mean something different to each one of us. The city that I grew up in was very livable because there was a pretty good public transportation system and there were amenities. And it was a good sized city, but people did not feel like they lived on top of each other. And there was quite a bit of green space. One of the reasons that I moved to Chapel Hill is because, having traveled to a number of places, one of the places that I liked best was the Netherlands. It has an extremely high population density. In fact, the Dutch say that God made the earth, but the Dutch made Holland, and they basically did, because they created land where there wasn't any, and they build on that land. But with the exception of cities like Rotterdam and maybe a couple of other places, you find very few buildings that are above 4 stories. And I was fascinated with how they expand towns. like Chapel Hill, whether it's a housing development or a commercial district, with the exception of the center of town, as long as you are going down any road, you just feel like you're in a green environment because there is a large buffer between the road and any kind of development. And towns are planned out so that they don't really exceed a certain size. And once a town reaches a certain size, they will create more land or create a new town. Because I think we all have begun to understand that when cities become really large, we lose a lot of the human contact and connectivity. And that's what I moved to Chapel Hill for. I wanted to live in a place that was smaller, but I wanted to have a sense of community. And to me, that's livability. And when you have a town like Chapel Hill has become, where only 50% of the people can afford to own a home, 50% of the people are living in apartments, you are really creating a slippery slope between haves and have-nots. And there needs to be a balance.
Thanks, Linda. So I have one thing in the chat that from George, this discussion about revenues, the sort of thing that we should be able to access when we have questions. So is that it's sort of discussion that you want to revisit, or has George disappeared here? He's left the room. Okay, well, I think that actually would be a great discussion. So let's see if there are any final comments.
Just Linda, you might look at a study from the Netherlands about how they allocated 10,000 new people and how they did it environmentally sound. It's a very interesting study.
Thank you. All right, any final comments? All right, well, I really appreciate you all joining us. We will have a recording. There's a question of whether we'll have it. We'll put it on our website.
Julie, could I say one thing?
Yes, go ahead, Pam.
Just very quickly, one thing I thought was interesting about tonight is hearing from some of the other people here, Chuck, Andrea, for example, about how this organization has supported you as a community member to advocate for something. That was one of the things I talked about, and I was not aware of what other people would be saying tonight. And I just think that is really a great thing to hear. It's interesting for me to learn this from all of you. And one of the reasons why this, organization has been, supporting the community. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a second question about Wegmans.
Okay, we'll just take that. All right, and then we'll close.
All right. I lived previously in Rockville, Maryland, and we had a big Wegmans come in there. And it's a great store and very well supported financially. But moving here, there are a lot of good smaller grocery stores. And my concern is, what is the effect of Wegmans on those stores? Are they going to be closing because of the impact of this big financially well-off store? Was that
Chapel Hill paid a lot to get Wegmans too. There was a huge incentive package which some of us objected to.
Oh wow.
Well, any other final comments? Thank you, Pam, for recognizing the community aspect of our work. It's really that's why I stay involved. Any last?
I'd like to say,
go ahead, Catherine.
I haven't been involved in CHALT all that long, but I've been very impressed with the emphasis on the truth and facts and not hearsay. And one example is having recordings, interviews with the candidates for the mayor and town council, each of whom got the same questions, and they were recorded and available for the public to hear, so they could hear why CHALT chose the candidates they did.
Yes. And those are available. So we'll put that out again in the in the newsletter. And in fact, if you like to be on the newsletter list, that's another reason to write info@chalt.org, and you can get on the newsletter list. All right, well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Andrea, thanks for emceeing and welcoming everybody. And thank you all for participating. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.